Hi guys, so today's in conversations, SBC in conversation is Anushka Dhar. She's a 16-year-old storyteller. It's a debut. A lot of zeal and perseverance to lead a meaningful life. She wants to make a difference in the world. She is a grade A student, a competitive sports person, and has written her first book. It's called Take Me Home, NH44. Here is the book. I love hardbacks. It's so lovely, beautiful to carry. This is a book which talks about the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits. The profits earned from this book, very important, the profits earned from this book will be used to fund the education of displaced Kashmiri Pandit children. So Anushka, what made you choose to write about this topic at such a young age?
So I'm a Kashmiri Pandit myself, for those of you who don't know that. And, Kashmir has always been a very sensitive topic in my house. We never really spoke about it. So as a kid growing up, I was alienated from Kashmir. I didn't really know anything about my Kashmiri Pandit's roots. I've never been to Kashmir. My family hasn't been to Kashmir in 30 years. And so Kashmir was sort of the elephant in the room at my house for the longest time. And, growing up, over time, I became more curious. What does it mean to be a Kashmiri Pandit? And what?
Can I interrupt you for a second? What do you mean by was the elephant in the room? I mean, you're Dhar. I can make out you are a Kashmiri Pandit. You're a Kashmiri Pandit. But what do you mean by it was something which was like an elephant in the room?
I think over time, I picked up the fact that there was something about it. I mean, there was, of course, some reason why we weren't speaking about Kashmir. And so, I knew a little bit that, my family had to flee Kashmir and, it's been difficult for them to go back and come to terms with what's happened. But I didn't really know the nitty gritty of it and what exactly happened. And for the longest time, I didn't even know about the exodus. So I think at the back of our minds, everybody in my house knew that something had happened, but we never really openly spoke about it. And, whenever we spoke about Kashmir, everybody was very hesitant. Especially my grandparents who, are very, very close to Kashmir and who, who've lived most of their lives there. And so, that hesitation around the topic of Kashmir, they
were kind of protecting your kids, you think, from telling you the stories. Is that what you felt? So what made you dig into it more?
Right. So I think, of course, the protectiveness, initially I couldn't pick up on it. I was like, why aren't you telling me about this? But over time now I've understood the fact that they were trying to shield me from it. And this started as a school project, actually. So in the curriculum I was studying, which is the MYP, we had to do something called the personal project. And you had to pick up something that's close to your identity and that you want to find out more about. And I thought that this was the perfect opportunity to understand my Kashmiri Pandit identity, my cultural identity. And it was something that people really hadn't talked about, and I didn't know much about it myself. So I thought this would be a great way to explore it. And at the time, I didn't really know what I was getting into because I didn't really understand the exodus. I wasn't even fully aware about it. But as I got into this process, my motivation initially was finding out more about myself and my Kashmiri Pandit roots, and it was initially like this process of self-discovery. But over time, my motivation shifted. I realized that the Kashmiri Pandit exodus wasn't really talked about, and unfortunately, the Kashmiri Pandit narrative is unknown to many people even today, especially those who are part of my generation. And so now, eventually, my motivation became sharing the Kashmiri Pandit story with other people, and really sharing about the exodus and about the resettlement and about
when you started with this project for your school, as you say. Who did you talk to first? Who was the first person that you went to? Your grandparents, your parents? Who did you speak to first?
So I first spoke about this to my father. So I told him that I wanted to do something about the Kashmiri Pandit story in the Kashmiri Pandit exodus. He was like, great, because his generation hasn't really done anything. Unfortunately, his generation has been more focused on resettling and building a life for themselves post-exodus. So a lot of members of their generation haven't really done anything in terms of, advocating for the Kashmiri Pandits, which I completely understand. And so it didn't even strike him initially that, this is something that we can speak about or we should speak about. And so I think he was a little shocked that and when I brought this to him, I was 14. So he was like, you're just a teenager. So he directed me to Mr. Ashok Pandit, who of course, knows a lot about the Kashmiri Pandit exodus. He's a Kashmiri Pandit himself. And, he has a lot of information. And I had a conversation with him and it lasted about 2.5 hours. I sat down and I put the voice memo on my phone on, I pressed record and he just spoke for 2.5 hours. And I just sat there listening and absorbing all the information he could give me. And he himself documented the exodus as well. So I got to see a lot of footage of the exodus. Unfortunately, at the time, the exodus wasn't well documented. So he was one of the sources where I could really, really understand what exactly happened. And so I think that was very eye-opening. And I just...
What was your first reaction after this 2.5 hours? I mean, it was a lot too much. It must have been a lot taken.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's so much.
So
once you walked away from there and you came home, what was the feeling? Was it like, oh my God, I started with a school project. I just wanted to understand my cultural identity. What have I gotten into? What was that?
Yeah, I think initially I was just shocked because me being a Kashmiri Pandit myself, I didn't know about this. So I was a little embarrassed as well. That I was like, how could I not know about this? And knowing that my family and my community had been through that made it very emotional for me because it was something that took me a little time to come to terms with because it was just so sudden. But as a writer, I knew that if I was going to talk about this, I needed to be more objective and I needed to keep my emotions aside during that process of writing. So when I was researching...
That was for 14 at that point of time.
Yeah.
Understand the fact that you needed to be more objective, keep your emotions aside when you've suddenly been dealt with this huge amount of information and emotional information at that. That's very mature of you to think of that I need to be objective. And how did you do that? I mean, grown-ups can't do that a lot of times when we are going through a lot of things to be objective about something and to keep the emotions aside. It's not easy. And, grown-ups struggle with it. So what was it? How did you do it?
So my parents have always raised me to, make very rational and informative decisions. And, if I'm feeling emotional, or if I'm hot-headed, I shouldn't do anything in that moment. I should wait until I can, control my emotions and, keep them aside. And so, if I would read something or watch something, about the exodus while I was doing my research that made me emotional, I would just stop in that moment and walk away from it. And, however long it would take me, I would only come back to it after that. So it would be a few hours, it could be a few days as well. But I knew that, if I became emotional and if I wrote it, it wouldn't have the same impact. I knew I needed to...
What is the longest time that it has taken for you after getting emotional to come back to that material?
I think about 8 days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
How did you process it in those 8 days?
So, I spoke to my dad, my grandparents a lot about it. I was, they really helped me come to terms with it. And they kept on telling me that, you don't need to do this. I mean, we never pushed you to do this, but I guess my motivation, to not only learn more about my Kashmiri Pandit's roots, but also to share the Kashmiri Pandit story ended up helping me, kept me in check throughout this entire process and, pushed me to be more objective. And, if I felt emotional, I think that was just the main motivation. And I've never been this motivated. I am a very motivated person, but I've never felt this kind of motivation before. Okay. So I think that just that motivation, kept me in check throughout this entire journey. And just...
So all this while in your growing up years, this was one time when you were always a Kashmiri Pandit, but this was the time when you suddenly felt that connection with your roots.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the reason why it kind of motivated you in that way.
Yeah.
So how it's a very, very serious topic. And like you said, it's a topic that nobody really wants to discuss. It's been relegated to the sidelines. Not so much is written about, not so much is documented about. Life has moved on, people have moved on, world has moved on, is what you feel sometimes. But then you're here, you realize that there's this whole community which hasn't, which is still, the wounds are fresh, unhealed, and there's been no sort of a bandage on it. There's no healing process that has gone through. And as we see with Holocaust and everything also, when you discuss things and when you talk about it in the future generations is when the healing starts to happen. So somewhere when I read your book, I felt like this was a process. Yes, you're right about keeping the emotions aside, but it's only when things like that come out that maybe the healing process will begin. I understand if a adult, a grown-up person would kind of think so much, but you're so young. How do you manage to keep the insecurities of the fact that it is such a serious topic? You know, forget about taking that up and then publishing it and putting it out in the world. How did you do that? What was that process?
This subject, of course, is very political and it has a lot of political ties as well. And I knew that people would also ask me about the politics of it. And ever since I published this book, a lot of people have approached me. What do you think about the politics? Hasn't that been done for the Kashmiri Pandits? But my stance on this is very clear. I'm not here to talk about the politics. I'm just here to talk about my community and their story. There is no political agenda behind this. Unfortunately, when it comes to such sensitive topics, a lot of the times there is politics attached to it and there are political agendas, but I really don't have any politics behind it, or I don't want to achieve anything political from it. And in terms of the insecurities, I think, of course, I spoke about how, talking to my father and my grandparents very regularly helped sort of keep me in control. And the motivation behind writing this book also helped keep me in control. But I guess at the end of the day, I believe that this needed to happen. I believe that we needed to talk about this, and I believe that we needed to share this story. And that belief, that was persistent throughout, the past 2 years, because I started writing this in 2019 and I published it in 2021. So that constant belief was, really helped me get over any challenges or any insecurities or any thoughts that I had that could potentially backtrack my progress.
I think the beauty of the book is also the fact that you have understood the fact that the moment it becomes political, people start going into two camps, and the actual message kind of gets left. And it's been so mature of you to actually do it in a very, as you said, in an objective way, and which makes you want to pick up and say, okay, what did happen? And this is not, and what I would love, the reason why I like the book so much, that it's not a blame game. And it's just documenting as to what happened. And there is a voice that has not been heard. And I think every story has different sides, and we want to hear this side of the story also. So I think that for me was a very, very attractive thing about this book. As you say, this is something, when you talk about the Exodus, it happened on the 19th January 1990, so to say, which is not very far away. It's quite current in that situation. That means this story is still being written. It's a story that's ongoing. It's not something that has been done with, and you can kind of take a seat back and take a look at it. Everybody is not as mature as you as to be able to do that and take a seat back and kind of look at it. So what do you think? Do you think there will be a happily ever after? How do you think this will end?
Something that I picked, interviews, talking to Kashmiri Pandits was a very important part about my research process. Today, they're settled around the world. So reaching out to Kashmiri Pandits around the world took a lot of time, but I was more than happy to do it. And I knew I needed to do that in order to capture the Kashmiri Pandit voice. And something that was consistent throughout was not only the love and positivity that they have for Kashmir and its people, despite everything that's happened, but also the shared emotion of, hope, of going back home one day. Despite everything that's happened, they're still so optimistic and still so hopeful. And, I really do hope that one day we can go home. I, being Kashmiri Pandit, who's never been to Kashmir, I really want to visit Kashmir and hopefully one day even settle in Kashmir, settle down in Kashmir.
Oh,
so
wow.
I also am very hopeful. And, with the new government, I think there is, some more with Article 31735A, there is some change that's happening, and that's definitely beneficial for the Kashmiri Pandit community. So I am hopeful, as is the entire community.
Hope is what you are looking. That's beautiful. That's what, world goes on and we live on, is hope. And that's what, the day you lose hope is when you lose everything. I really believe in that. And that's how I've led my life. Hope is the key word. But there's another very key word. The moment Kashmir is mentioned, and whatever of Kashmir is mentioned is something that is always kind of spoken about, and it's called Kashmirian.
Yes.
Can you explain that to me? Because it's a term that's constantly thrown around, but what does it really mean?
Right. So I speak about Kashmiriyat in the beginning of my book as well. And my grandparents also, whenever they speak about Kashmiriyat, they're very passionate about it. And my understanding is that it's an idea where everybody lives together in harmony and peace. It's about accepting, it's about loving, and it's about respecting, other people despite your differences. It's loving people and respecting them regardless of their imperfections and regardless of, any difference. And my grandparents spoke about a time where they saw Kashmiriyat in Kashmir and lived, they still embody that spirit today. But there was a time where they spoke about where Muslims and Hindus lived in harmony and where they had friends who were Muslim, who were just like family. And there's this sense of Kashmiriyat that was there between these communities, regardless of the religious differences. And so I think the essence of Kashmiriyat is putting your differences aside and coming together to celebrate something. And I think what they celebrated was the valley.
I want to read a piece of the book, and then I'll move from there. I thought this was a very, very, this kind of summed up the book and was very beautiful for me. Despite having been endlessly discriminated against, despite having been abused, and despite having been alienated from their home, the Kashmiri Pandit community did not respond with violence. Why, you ask? Was it because they were afraid to fight? Was it because they had given up? Was it out of fear? No. They did not respond with violence because that is not who they are. The values they believe in, the ideologies they preach, their upbringing has taught them not to fight fire with fire. It's taught them to hold their ground, treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are and what they've done, and above all, fight their battles in peace. Not every battle has to be fought with violence. That line, not every battle has to be fought with violence. This paragraph for me, coming from the next generation, the youth, so to say, of Kashmir, is so heartening and it's so amazing. It's beautiful to read that. I love that fact about this book. And like in your book, you have pointed this out, shown this to us by, because you've shown how Kashmiri Pandits have expressed their grief, their trauma. They've expressed it through art, and your book features pictures of all this art. Could you tell us more about this art?
So, something that even took me a little by surprise was just how much, their songs, their pieces of literature, their paintings, their sketches, and even from members of the younger generation, where they communicate how they express their emotions, about the exodus and, what they feel and think about Kashmir even today. And I thought those would be difficult to find, but they really aren't, because there are so many Kashmiri Pandits who are using their creativity and their skills to talk about Kashmir. And that's something that stood out for me as well. Unfortunately, violence is the common or the normal in today's world, where people, tend to retaliate with violence, and that's the go-to move. But the Kashmiri Pandit community didn't do that, even in a time where they were stripped of everything. I mean, just to think that they were forced to leave their house and leave life as they know it one night, not knowing when they'll be back. I mean, they thought they'll be back in a few days. It's been 30 years and they still haven't gone back. So just to overcome that and still hold your ground and still only hold love and respect for the land and its people is just, it's unbelievable. And I think that's where Kashmiriyat comes in as well. I think they held on to that ideology as a community, and that's reflected in their art as well. And recently I had gone to this. There's this association in the United States. It's called Kosher Rag, and they bring Kashmiri Pandits from around the world together, from Australia, from the UK, from India, from the US, and they hold these events quite frequently throughout the year, where Kashmiri Pandits showcase their musical talents and abilities. And I think it's such a great way to bring Kashmiri Pandits together and, really focus on their art and use their art to make a statement or to convey how they feel. And it's people of all ages. I mean, while they do focus on the younger generation, there were, older people as well over there who haven't been to Kashmir in so long, who are still, singing Kashmiri songs and doing Kashmiri dances. And I recently got the opportunity to speak at their event a few weeks back. And it was so heartwarming. Even though I had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning for that, I was ready to do it because it was honestly.
Did it kind of, do you think in the process of writing this book, has it kind of somewhere completed you feel?
Definitely. As I said before, I was alienated from one part of my identity, from like my cultural and religious identity for a very long time. And I think writing this book helped me bring some kind of closure and this level of understanding that I've never had before of my Kashmiri Pandits roots. And it made me feel more connected to my community than ever. I've never felt this close to my Kashmiri Pandit roots ever. And I genuinely do feel this process has shaped me as a person and has also shaped what I want to do with my life. And so, yes, I do feel it has completed me.
This is the beauty, like I said, though Take Me Home, NH44 is written by 16-year-old Anushka, but it is definitely something that I would recommend to all my book club members to read, because this was, one had heard about it, but I did not know so much about it. And the way you've put it through, the way you have shown us the love, the way you've explained the meaning, and like you said, it's objectively narrated. And it's just nice to know the story from the other side also, that, or just to start a conversation. And it is amazing that your generation is actually picking up on that and starting this conversation. And I'm sure there are a lot of, people from your community who really must be truly appreciating what you're doing. So hats off to what you've been doing. And I wish you all the best for whatever it is that you do in future. But we would like to know a bit of what is it that you're planning next?
So right now I am focusing on my education. I'm in 12th. I'm in 12th grade right now. So I'm focusing on my university applications, which are due in a few months. That's a lot of work. And I'm doing the IB, so that as a curriculum is very hectic. But, besides that, I'm sort of engaging with a lot of, communities of younger individuals, such as Fable Street, or just communities of students and of people who are from my generation, in order to share this story. In terms of what I'm doing in the future, I aspire to be a part of the film and television industry like my father, because I want to share more meaningful stories like this through, a creative platform and creative means. And that's what I plan on studying at university as well.
Okay. So you plan on taking that up as your major subjects?
Yes.
That's lovely. That's nice to know. Also, all the best for that. And also, I hope that while you make your name in the film and television industry, you do keep writing books also. That's what I would hope for, because we are a book club and we love people who write books, and especially youngsters who write books, read books. So when you start writing for the other mediums, don't forget books. Please do keep writing books also. And the other thing that, if possible, and if you started something which I feel is a movement, and especially for your generation, like you said, for your parents' generation, it was about building a life. And when you're building a life, there's not really that much of time to do something else. But that generation has built a life for you. And so maybe it's time for your generation to kind of pick up what your grandparents were going through and kind of bring that story out. And I do hope maybe as NGOs or whatever it is that you do in the world, I do hope that this journey that you started of Take Me Home NH44, I do hope that you reach this home soon.
Thank you.
All the best for your future. And it was lovely to have you on SBC, and looking forward to more from you, Anushka.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.